Welcome to the Emerging Biotech Leader, where we help biotech leaders maximize the value of their therapeutics from translational development to product launch. We're your hosts. I'm Kim Kushner.
And I'm Ramin Farhood. We are here to help you navigate the pitfalls of the biotech industry and illuminate the path forward. Welcome to today's episode of Emerging Biotech Leader. I'm excited to have Dr. Thomas Lönngren with us. Thomas has over 30 years of experience in regulatory approval and market access in both US and Europe. And he's currently a strategic advisor at SSI Strategy and NDA Group. In today's episode, we'll debrief on the previous conversation that we had with Dr. Keith Gottesdiener, the CEO and president of Prime Medicine, where we discussed and explored the fast environment in biotech innovation, the complexity and challenges of bringing a product to the market, the commercialization of the product, getting reimbursed for the product, the drug approval process, and all the complexity that comes with it. And also, lastly, we discussed the need and the necessity of developing new skill sets such as board management, interactions with the investors, fundraising, and all of this during the time that you're trying to scale an organization. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ramin, and thank you so much to invite me to this podcast. I'm really looking forward to share my experience.
Thank you for coming. Looking forward to our conversation. I guess the first question before we get to the core of our topic on regulatory landscape, can you share with us your career journey and what motivated you to transition from a regulatory agency to advising pharmaceutical companies?
Yeah, I started many years ago to work with the Swedish Board of Health and Welfare in Sweden that were transformed into Medical Product Agency in Sweden, which is the Swedish national agency. And when Sweden became member of European Union in 1995, we started to be very active working with the European Union. I was in the forefront, traveling to Brussels in order to shape the European regulatory system in the beginning. And I went to be the Deputy Director General of the Swedish agency. And when we got close in 2005, the existing director of European Medicine Agency, Fernand Sauer, he told me that he will step down. And he said to me, maybe you should apply. And I did. And we were five people coming to the management board in London for the EMA. And we present ourselves, what we want to do with the agency. And then we were sitting out waiting for the management board elaboration. And the chairman came out, turned to me and said, Thomas, you got a new job. Okay. I didn't know what I have started, but that was the start of 10 years, exciting work, building up the European Medicine Agency from the beginning. We were quite small. We were about 150 people, and when I left, we were 850 people. And we were at that time recognized as one of the leading regulatory agencies in the world together with the FDA. And during my time, we have all these reforms with the orphan drug legislation, the pediatric legislation came in, advanced therapy legislation, change in the pharmacovigilance legislation, and several change in the framework of the pharma legislation in Europe. So it was quite exciting, but you could only be at that position for 10 years. And after then, I have reached the top of the regulatory job. So I couldn't get any bigger regulatory job, more or less. So I took the decision that I'm stepping down to be a regulator and try to use my knowledge in order to go into the consultancy business. And there, NDA, the Swedish company, and the NDA can come up and offer me a little platform with other regulators who are working in an advisory board of NDA. And that was from 2011. And I started to help them to build up a health technology advisory board at NDA, because that was high on the topic at that time in European Union. And it was very successful. And we helped many big pharma who was at that time not really prepared for health technology assessment. We have a fantastic board with a leading professor in health economy in the board, and it was very exciting to work on that. And then I turned at the NDA because NDA was expanding to the US and wanted to get into the US market. So I volunteered to spend a lot of time for NDA in Boston, which was a fantastic experience over many years. I was invited to conferences and speaking, and I built up a fantastic network among the biotech companies in Boston, and also the greater area around New York and San Francisco in US. Over many years, I probably have interacted with about 60 biotech companies. Very exciting experience, I must say. And of course, I was there in order to talk about European regulatory system and explain how important it was that these biotech companies not only designing their clinical trials for the FDA, but they should also look out at the rest of the world because the medicine are needed, not only in the US. And that was an interesting experience to try to convince them, and I could come back to that. In parallel with the NDA, I also took up a couple of board positions in the beginning in 2011, 12, 13, mainly in Australia, where I'm most spending my winter, escaping from the winter up here in the Northern Hemisphere. A biotech company in Brisbane. Interesting, we failed on a phase 2 study and the company doesn't exist anymore. It was an extremely painful experience to see and close down a biotech company, but I have that experience. I also joined a medtech company in Melbourne, and we tried to commercialize a device for Parkinson in US. And it was also quite interesting experience to understand the commercialization. This was not a pharmaceutical, this was a device, but it was not easy. So I have a lot of things from that. And now I'm board member in 2 companies. One, Egetis Therapeutics in Stockholm. We have a rare disease orphan drug. And we are in a late stage. We have just filed to my old agency, and we are waiting for the day 120 questions to respond to the agency. We are probably, hopefully, filing next year with the FDA. And the other company I'm involved in as a board member is Compass Pathways. We develop psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. And we have now 2 big phase 3 clinical studies going on, nearly 1,000 people in US and Europe, in order to demonstrate the efficacy of psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. So we're leading the race there, but there is a lot of learning, of course, coming in with a new modality that this is, and of course have an intensive discussion with both the FDA and EMA about the understanding about this completely different kind of treatment that this is. So that's a little of the background what I have done and what I'm doing today. So I'm very happy to answer your question about more details.
No, that's very helpful. So Thomas, let's get into it. What are, from your experience, what are some of the common pitfalls that companies encounter during different stages of development? And can you share some of those, some of the examples or maybe case studies? And even maybe before you answer that question, how early do we engage with the regulators, and also how early do we need to put in place a regulatory strategy? What are some of your thoughts there and your experience?
I think it's a bit different because, we have a very well-developed, guideline system. We have ICH, a developed guidelines for development of drug, CMC, preclinical and clinical guidelines, and there's well established, from regulators. But when we are coming with a new modality and a new science behind it, it's quite different, because then you need to start very early to think about, okay, what kind of surprise will this have from a regulatory point of view? And how will we develop it from a preclinical point of view? Maybe as with advanced therapy, is a lot of issues with the CMC and manufacturing, as you well know. So when you have that kind of drug, then you need to start very early, and you need to have an understanding about the regulatory strategy that you want to apply, because that, of course, have direct impact on how much money you need to raise in order to do development. And if you don't have any clue about that, it will be very difficult to continue with the development. And I'm just working with a company in Sydney, Australia. We are developing a cell therapy for Alzheimer. And we are in the preclinical stage, and we did interact very early with the FDA and took a pre-IND advice from them for this cell therapy, and it was fantastic. We got really, really good response from the FDA, and now we are working in order to complete that preclinical, because we are planning now to go into clinic next year. And we are just raising money for that, and we were very happy. There was a company in Melbourne who went in as a lead investors. And then last week, Eli Lilly came in and said, we are on board. So that's a good thing. So hopefully now we have the financing for our phase 1 study. But it was based on that we have a regulatory strategy from the beginning, understand the cost it will take us to the first step, the phase 1, and also to have that in the background when you are going to investors in order to get more money.
What are some of the key elements and the thinking that you put behind when you're thinking about a regulatory strategy? What are maybe the 2 to 3 things that one should be thinking about when they want to build their strategy, and why is that so critical?
Well, the regulatory strategy is stretching, over a long period of time. So the time perspective is important. And it's like a weather forecast, you can't predict it so long, but you need to have an understanding about the long-term forecast, where things could go. But in the beginning, depending on the asset you have, if you have a well-known asset, well-established guidelines and procedure, there are already products on the market, quite clear cut. Maybe you don't need even to go in to talk with the regulators about it. Maybe you could find a way, develop your own strategy from the beginning. But as I said, when it's coming into more complex molecules, biological molecules, new modalities, new science behind it, then you need to have a good interaction with the regulators before you are forming your regulatory strategy. So, you need to talk with the regulators first in order to get an understanding, okay, where should we go with this? And there is important that you are using all the tools that the regulatory agency have today. And, FDA, EMA have all kind of channels in order to come in to discuss new modalities with them and have that possibility. So lesson number 1, talk with the regulators first, and then you could start to build your regulatory strategy.
Excellent advice. Let's shift our conversation a little bit on your experience with biotech boards. And I know you sit in a couple of different boards, and you also interact with a lot of boards from the client's perspective. What are some of the key learnings that you've had being on the board, and also on the other side, maybe presenting to the board, that you would think our audience would benefit from to focusing on?
Well, first of all, when you are a board member, you are there in order to represent the shareholders. And sometimes it could be difficult because shareholders have a different view than the company and the management of the company. So they also in tension there. But in the end, you need to do what's best for the company and in the combination with the shareholders. And of course, the role of the board is a lot of governance, of course. And I will not talk about that, all kind of governance going in when it comes to whatever you are private or wherever you are listed. And we went public in NASDAQ in New York with Compass Pathways some 4 years ago. And that was an interesting experience, certainly from a governance point of view. Now, I've seen a lot of board, without talking about my own boards, there is a dynamic in the board, and depending on the board members, what kind of experience does the board member have? Of course, the board need to adopt the plan for the company and the strategy for the company in order to get it. When they do that, probably doesn't go so deep into every aspect of it. It is, of course, the CEO who is responsible to lead the company, and in a way the board will. So there are different level of boards with different kind of people who are involved, depending on their expertise. They are involved in different aspects. For example, if you have a very strong board with clinical expertise, they will certainly be involved in the company's design of a phase 2 study or phase 3 study or wherever it is. But many companies maybe doesn't have clinical expertise, so they have other expertise, and in that case they are heavily relying on the CEO and the management of the company to do it. So it's vary from company to company. One observation from the US was when you had the CEO was an American, and the board had only American board members. They didn't understand that if something exists outside United States. And of course, I was there to say to, hey guys, you can't only go to the FDA, you need also to think about the rest of the Europe, because you need for your shareholders in order to increase the value of the product. Even though that US is a big market, there is a market out in the rest of the world and you need your product there. So please think about when you are approving your strategy for company, that there is a strategy also for the rest of the world. And in that respect, you need to talk with other regulators in the world and maybe not only talk with the FDA. I have seen, as an example, big pharma, and all the biotech companies are feeding the big pharma today. And I have two examples where big pharma have acquired an asset from a biotech company, where they have done the development entirely for the FDA, got approval by the FDA, and then the CEO say, oh, we need to approve this product in Europe within half a year. There was no comparator. There was no thinking about health technology assessment. They didn't even know about it. There was nothing in the file. And of course, we came in as consultants and try to help them, so to say, how to fix that. And unfortunately, there was not a quick fix. So it maybe could end up that I have to redo, comparative clinical trials in order to be successful in Europe. Not only from a regulatory point of view, but from a payer point of view. So that's an example. Go global in the regulatory strategy. That's or the commercial strategy, by the way.
Excellent. That's excellent. Thank you. What do you think, Thomas, are going to be some emerging trends in regulatory approval and access that you'll see that maybe it's coming in 3 to 5 years, or it's a path that is a trend that you see is already kind of starting being implemented? What are some of the thoughts around that?
Well, you have both the regulatory approval, and the regulatory approval is not the same as commercial success anymore, not even in the US, because you need to demonstrate the added value of this product that is meaningful for the patient. And the level of requirement from a regulatory point of view is maybe here, but when you are going to the payers, it's probably here. And that is something that everybody. And what's happening in Europe now, that we have a new legislation with a joint HTA evaluation on a European level that come into force next year in January for oncology products and advanced therapy products. So if you have an oncology product today, if you're filing your product to EMA after 26th of January, I think it is, then you need to apply for a joint health technology assessment in Europe. And if you don't have a comparator clinical trials, then you are in a big trouble. So, company doesn't think that this is a good trend. Matter of fact, the legislators in Europe have decided upon that and go for it. So this is something that the company have to be aware of. But other trends, and that we have seen, I think that COVID was a good initiation of a lot of new thinking tools. For example, remote monitoring of clinical trials, remote monitoring, even when it's come to inspections and things like that, a new way to operate in a more efficient way. And I think that kind of kick regulators and industry got from the COVID. They were forced to do things in another way. That is good. And you have seen both FDA and EMA and also the industry. We are talking about how to use real world data in decision making. The question is how much evidence is the data? And that is probably that the industry put a lot of emphasis in this and think that this will, replace randomized controlled clinical trials and be the magic bullet, in order to get to the market. Not so easy yet, but you could see the interest from both EMA and FDA. And if you're tracking the approvals, you could see that we have several approvals, and certainly in the area of orphan drug, where you more or less can't do a randomized controlled clinical trials. We have seen drugs that have been approved, with real world evidence only, and also as a complement to real world evidence, to randomized controlled clinical trials. So that is something that is moving, and as usual with regulatory acceptance, it doesn't go over a day, it takes a long time. But that is a track on this in the future when we will see more of this data, when we have more quality data coming in. And both FDA and EMA are working on that in order to build up networks of reliable data.
And it's really hard to, right? Sorry to interrupt, Thomas. And it's really hard to make up for that lost time, right? Because, it does take time. And that's why it's so critical to think about your regulatory strategy very, very early on, right around your phase one or as you're entering to phase one. So you have a pretty clear idea and hopefully a smoother path to approval. I want to take on a topic that you brought up about the impact of health technology, the HTA and the payers. And you mentioned that developing the medicine is way beyond approval now, right? Maybe a couple of decades ago, it was fine. You get an approval and the HTA and the payers will cover. But now you also mentioned the real world evidence data, and how you're going to get reimbursed, and the access needs to be part of that regulatory strategy from the beginning, not something that you start thinking about closer to the approval date or even sometimes post-approval. Talk about that a little bit. How do you bring both of those together? You have your eyes both on approval and also the access to make sure that actually the patients will get the drug at the end of the day post-approval.
I think it's also an issue how the companies, a big pharma or a biotech company, are organized themselves. In the biotech companies, certainly the US one, you don't have any health technology assessment at all. You maybe have started to develop a commercial team in many of the companies, So, but the commercial team are looking at the commercial aspects, but they totally forget that, in order to be successful from commercial point of view, we also demonstrate that we have an added value of this. And it's a clinical meaningful treatment that is worth to pay for in the end. And here you could see that I think there is an issue with many of the company who doesn't have this competence internally, and certainly doesn't have the competence if they have health technology assessment or payers experience together with the commercial. The big pharma have been able to do this in a good way. So they are very aware about what's going on in Europe and how to deal with but the smaller biotech companies doesn't have this capacity. So here there is a need for good regulatory health HTA consultants that could come in and help them to get an understanding of that. And as I said, it's important to do it early, because it could affect how you are designing your phase 3 studies. And whatever you are not only going for a placebo-controlled clinical trial, you maybe need to have a comparator of some kind, or you need to have some kind of strategy. And in Europe, you have the situation that more or less Germany is the price reference. And if you don't be able to convince the German authority, that will be very difficult, because then you will have the price as the cheapest generic if you can't demonstrate added value to your drug. And there are many companies who are struggling with that now. But if they have been thinking about that in good time, and maybe also talk with the HTA bodies in Europe, maybe they could have designed a phase 3 study so they have some kind of data on the comparative effectiveness of these products. The other way, of course, to do it is, of course, to rely on real-world data, real-world evidence, and do it post-authorization. But then there is a problem that they are missing the train. They already got a price on a lower level, and then it's very difficult to get back on the bigger. And we see this happen in US also now, so with the payers in Europe, US. So this is something that very important for company or develop new drugs. Otherwise, when they are getting in there close to filing, go to the market, then realize that it was easy to get EMA and FDA to approve the drug, but could we commercialize it? Could we get a commercial success of it? Probably not, in many cases.
Do you find? Thanks, Thomas. Maybe one last question that I want to ask you with regards to leadership and talent in the regulatory space, especially on a biotech and a pharma side. Do you feel that it's hard, especially for smaller biotech companies, to attract the right talent with the right experience to advise them from early on to the process, so they don't have some of these surprises later when they have to face it with the regulators? How do you overcome that? What are some of the suggestions and recommendations you have for our CEOs and CMOs that may be listening to these podcasts with regards to getting the right advice and direction from experts in this field?
Well, if I want to recruit a CEO for a biotech company, I should be very careful. I certainly should look for someone who have done it before, okay? Who have a track record of working with biotech companies and have done a lot of taking many drugs to the market. And even though that biotech companies are different, some of these people are coming from big pharma. There are many people coming from big pharma who have been involved in taking many drugs from the market, and some of them are very good. But of course, they maybe not have all the aspects in order to run a small biotech company with all the aspects. And in that respect, you need to recruit a good chief financial officer, and you need to have a good clinical lead in the company. You need to have a good chief medical officer. And of course, it's a lot of competition today on the market. And But the downturn in the biotech industry have done that many biotech companies more or less failing, and so we have seen a lot of bankruptcy in companies because of the difficulty with financing now. And so I think there is a market out there for attracting good people into the biotech companies, but you have to pay for it for sure.
Right. Having a robust strategy and a plan with a precise executional plan, it seems to be very critical, especially for fundraising as well. That's why regulatory also becomes such a critical piece of this entire cycle, to making sure that the voice and perspective of experts such as yourself is captured early on in the thinking, and the overall building the overall strategy beyond the approval for the brand. Thomas, thank you very much for your time today. We really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you again for sharing some of your insights and your knowledge with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Emerging Biotech Leader, an SSI strategy podcast. Join us each month for more conversations with biotech leaders. If you'd like to help navigating the complexities of biotech, reach out to our team at ssistrategy.com. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review.